is what drives people's behavior. So not only my own first, but then when I start leading people, and what drives their behaviors is their attitude. And what drives their attitude is their belief system. And if you can really understand what their belief system is and get.
All right. Well, thank you so much for, Mark, really just joining us, and we're really excited to be having you on as a guest, and obviously just your experience and level of experience. And obviously, I told a little bit about, on the intro, a little bit about you, but I'd love to dive in and really, Mark, get a glimpse of kind of your perspective. What have you been able to accomplish? I know your vision of where you're going. I'd love to hear kind of what the heartache was to get where you're at now, and the impact that you're making right now, Mark. So, I'd love to hear from you.
Well, I mean, first of all, thanks for having me on. It's exciting to be here. And I think that each of us probably have a background story on things that we've had to overcome or hurdles that we had gone through. And as long as we faced them in the right way, they became lessons, and great lessons at that. I was in corporate America 35 years, as you mentioned, 21 years at the C level, but it took me a little bit to get there. But my best experience that catapulted me was when I was terminated at the age of 20 from a management role of running a fast food restaurant. And I was obviously thought I was well qualified, but when I got terminated, it made me really say, well, wait a second, I had no development plan for myself on where I was going or the skills that I needed. I had no vision, and no one else working with me on these things as well, that it really made me take a step back. And I always tell people that I read the book, The 1 Minute Manager. And boy, it's just like, one, it's a great and simple read. I think I read it once a year, just a refresher. And that's really what I would say is a transition from a manager to a leader. And I started putting those practices in place, catching people doing something right, earning their trust and respect, that I could do a 1 minute reprimand. Didn't take more than that. Sharing the vision constantly, those type of things, that it catapulted my success where I went next, where I won Manager of the Year. And as I grew and as I then started focusing on other people's success, mine came naturally. And in fact, I put that in my LinkedIn profile because when you really truly learn about servant leadership, it's not about me. It's about, if everything is built correctly and I focus on others reaching their goals through their development, I don't have to worry about my own.
Well, that's awesome, man, and really, that's what I find so interesting. Obviously, you've taken something, in essence, complex, right, and made it very simple, right? Because obviously, we always look at, my entrepreneurs and the individuals that listen. I know that they're in a leadership position, right? But we always wonder, how can we do a little bit more? What's that 1, 3, 5, 6% growth to be able to always constantly be improving ourselves, right? Because if you're stagnant, you're never really stagnant. You're either falling or you're moving, right? Moving forward, and so. What I'd like to hear, Mark, a little bit on, how did you compartmentalize the difference between, management versus leadership, and obviously the different characteristics, and then be able to dial in those characteristics to make sure, okay, because it's the same concept going from employee mindset to business owner mindset, right? It's a mindset. And I'd love to hear a little bit more of how you were able to switch that mindset from a management to leadership and what that looks like for you.
Well, in fact, I do a whole presentation on it when I work on workshops on what's the difference between a manager and leader and what would you want. And a management is a manager, and there's nothing wrong with that. Sometimes you might want a manager if it's like, hey, I want you to just watch this department for 6 months. It's making money. Don't change anything. So they like to keep things within the status quo. They don't challenge the status quo. They work on their own development, and they're goal oriented, in those ways. But a leader challenges the status quo. They're looking for new ways and to break the glass ceiling, or how do I get more innovative? And they'll take what I call calculated risk, not blind risk, but calculated risk on, well, based on what I know, assumptions, knowledge, skills, and experience, I think that we should do these things here. They lay things out in a plan, and they really break down. Here's the biggest thing: a manager will keep things in status quo, And sometimes they'll just keep planning again if something didn't work, where a leader will define why didn't something work. Because if I don't want to get myself in a cycle where I'm planning again with no results, which we've all may have worked for companies where they're having meetings just to plan the next meeting, yeah, and it gets in that redundant cycle. So realizing that it's one of three things that make causes failure, whether in a person or in an organization, and it's either people, strategy, or execution. So is it the wrong people? Is it the wrong strategy or the wrong execution or a combination thereof? So one of the processes that I learned early on is to have a evaluation process on all things that I build or that I put into place. So it's not only, hey, we're going to do this strategy, but when are we going to evaluate different aspects of it? What are the milestones that show that we're achieving success? Because the danger from a manager sometimes is here's our long-term goal, but they don't know how to show that light at the end of the tunnel. And sometimes that long-term goal is quite an achievement to achieve that unless people know we're making progress, you might lose some momentum where that leader says, well, yeah, we want to achieve this. This is the long-term goals, but here are the milestones that once we hit some of these milestones, we know that we're moving in the right direction. And so they talk about the vision constantly, but also point to those milestones to really keep the people focused and just moving forward. And people have to have that belief system. I would say my biggest thing that I learned and that I teach now is what drives people's behavior. So not only my own first, but then when I start leading people, and what drives their behaviors is their attitude. And what drives their attitude is their belief system. And if you can really understand what their belief system is and get to the heart of that, you can really make strides not only in yourself, but then in others that you're leading. And that's where John Maxwell says leadership in one word is influence. It's how you can influence them to make that impact. Hopefully that's a short answer.
Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense, and I love what you said there because it's really dialing this in and understanding the different characteristics, like I mentioned, between management and leadership, and having the right leadership, characteristics on a consistent basis. And just like you said, those are kind of the biggest things. Now, I would like to kind of step back and dial into what you said in regarding, risk. Right. In order to grow, you have to have a certain amount of risk. However, though, I think many of us at the beginning of our business or our life or whatever, we can take, when we're 20 and we're young, we're stupid, we can take a stupid amount of risk because there's no responsibility. Right. But once you're in a situation where you have a large business or you have employees, and the thing is you're stagnant. But how do you grow? How do you, I guess my question is to you is, how do you identify certain rules where you say, okay, hey, leaders, you can take maybe 10%, 15% of your income or revenue and maybe put it toward a different project. And you may fail, but that's okay, right? But that's a kind of a controlled risk. So I'd love to kind of get your response, because that's kind of our entrepreneurs. They got a good business. They're making $100,000, $150,000, $200,000, $400,000 a year. But how do you take that extra little calculated risk? Definitely being a leader and having those responsibilities is very scary. So I'd love to get your response on what you would suggest in that.
Yeah, well, quite a question you have there. So I'll take it a step back as well, because I will say the biggest thing that when I take over an organization, and early in my career, I was a turnaround specialist. So I would go into organizations that were suffering. And so much like there, but even when being an entrepreneur, when things are going well, is I would always focus on teaching critical thinking. How do you problem solve? How do you make decisions? And then once I see that you have a good grasp on that, how are you empowered to do those within our organization? And that's the danger with many organizations, is if people don't know where they're empowered, then they're sitting on their hands. And the best companies empower their people, but they have to learn how to. So that's why, in an organization that was struggling, I would quickly teach them how I problem solve, because I wanted them to know how I think through things. And I have a set method that goes around a baseball diamond, but that way, if they brought something to me, they knew, or they learned quickly what questions I would ask. And I even would tell them, yeah, look, you can have your other methods, but have a method, because I want it to be instinctful for you. So what helped me turn around any organization was I would just surround myself with problem solvers and decision makers and empower them. It makes your job easier, right? But you would also find those on the leadership team that couldn't grasp that. And so they really weren't meant for leaders to be a leader. So the best organizations then empower their people based on those critical thinking skills because they earn trust. And then you set your parameters about here are your parameters. So I talk about a company called Rackspace. And in 1998 is when they started. They did a great job of defining how they would empower the people because their mission statement was we will be fanatical about customer service. They were, so if you're telling your customers we will be fanatical about customer service, then you have to tell your employees, we just made this commitment to our customers. How does that affect you by role? And then how do we need to empower you, even to how much you can commit financially the company to? So that's the same in the entrepreneurial spirit of, hey, you've earned this trust, and I want you to continue to push the limits to earn more trust from me. One of my first things that I teach about in communication is how to set expectations early, often, and consistently. So on day one, I set expectations, who I am, maybe a little bit about myself, so you would understand, that I repeat myself constantly. It's just one of the things I tell people. But whatever I'm repeating might be important to me, so you might take note. But the expectations would also be, I want you to really take self-accountability. I'm big on self-accountability. So I want you to push the limits. Come to me if you have questions. If there's skills and knowledge that for another role that you might be interested in, how you take self-accountability will tell me everything, because when I do have time to invest in someone, you make that choice easy. When I do have time to promote someone, you make that choice easy. So that also comes because it adds to the entrepreneurial spirit of everybody in the organization of, Mark, I need you to expand my parameters, because here's what I want to start doing. And I would loosen that up, and they didn't have to come to answer to me, but they would bring me the results. Sometimes it wasn't always pretty, but if it was within the parameters, then we were able to say, well, let's break down, let's go through the problem solving, and let's see what you could have done better. I always felt that anything that brought a coaching opportunity was great as well. Quick story, I was in technology for 20 something years, and way before Microsoft was number one, a company called Novell was number one, if people even remember them. But I remember seeing Bill Gates telling a story where how he empowered his people, and he wanted them to be very innovative. And he told a story about one of the people he empowered, and they could commit the company and spend quite a bit of money, that he made $1 million mistake. And someone asked, well, did you let him go? He said, no, I had $1 million invested in him. He was empowered within that realm. And it happened to be the same guy that created Windows 95, which catapulted us to number one. So, wow. That's just one of those stories that, look, everything is relative to Microsoft being $1 billion company, so $1 million to them is different than $1 million to me. But yeah, you can see how he always pushed that innovation and creativity. That that same person is who created Windows 95, which took Microsoft to number one.
That's incredible. And I love what you said there, because see, even having, just like you said, the right perspective as a leader, some of your employees, some of your other, leaders are going to make a mistake, right? And that's okay. But the thing is, really, trusting and putting kind of that it builds that, camaraderie, if you will. Hey, you know what?
Right.
You're not going to, if you go out there and risk something on your own and make a decision on your own, that's fantastic. And that may have not done the best, but as a leader, you having the right perspective and saying, hey, this is awesome, because what can we learn from it? I think that's really, really awesome what you said. Now, also, what I'd like to dive into a little bit is, obviously, as your business grows, right? And you get to a point where, okay, you need not only to lead followers, but you need to lead leaders, because you can't be one-on-one for the rest of your life. You got, employees, maybe you go from 20 to 50, or maybe you're dealing with just scaling your business and your customers and your clients, and you're not able to do all that all at once. And so my question is as leaders, take yourself to the next level, how do you lead other leaders, or how do you attract other high quality leaders so you can delegate responsibility, not just an employee or a follower, but to other leaders that obviously take extreme ownership, like you were mentioning?
Well, I mean, there's several steps in that process. So if I may, because one of the things I teach is called a behavior assessment. And so I'll take you back that when I was running a leadership team, that the behavior assessment says, what are the behaviors that you do on a normal day? And then you do the assessment on what are the behaviors on an ideal day, because you start seeing where the gaps are. I'm not praising people enough. I'm spending too much time directing or persuading, and not doing enough time brainstorming. So you have to really reflect on yourself as well. So I do a lot of self-assessment, leadership traits, but then I also show the leaders do the assessment on me. So I teach them transparency, that leadership 360, that what are your thoughts and are there gaps for how you perceive me to how I perceive myself? Because I want them to do the same to their teams, because it's always about what can we always improve upon. And, we do those every 6 months or at least once a year at a minimum. But I tell the story that when I was working with my leadership team, I showed them, here's my behavior survey. And do you feel that it's accurate? We were in, and they all said it's pretty accurate. And I said, well, what are some of the things that you think I needed to spend more time on? And it took the leadership team that said, you need to spend more time on brainstorming. Because when you brainstorm, we see our organization take leaps and bounds. I said, okay, well, here's the difficulty. Because of these other behaviors, here are the things that are holding me back. And my team said, delegate that stuff to us. So I created an environment of transparency. And, when you delegate, delegate isn't just giving things away. There's a 4-step process. Who's right for it? What are you delegating? How do you train them on it? And then letting them know how you're going to follow up and coach, right? It's not just here, boom. Sometimes it's like, I'll check with you in a week, then I'll check with you in 30 days. But it's also creating that environment that I want others hungry of, why are you giving Jim more responsibility? What can I take over from you? And I would tell people that, let me just say it this way. I would tell people on day one, look, I want to tell you that I play favorites because I won't deny it when you go home and complain. But I play favorites based upon how coachable you are, based upon your self-accountability, based upon your behavior modification when I correct you. You'll be my favorite, that I want to spend time where my energy benefits me and the organization. And if you ever notice that I'm not giving you enough energy or giving someone more, please feel free to ask, because then we can have that conversation. And so, because I would tell them my energy is important to me. So it's always all about the environment that you build, that you want those people hungry. I have a saying that's in one of my books, or a statement or quote, whatever you call it nowadays, that says, people have an innate hunger to be led. Whether they know it or not, they're looking for leadership. And I always say that as leaders, we have a responsibility to understand what that means, because they will follow even the wrong leaders to mass suicide, right? So what that responsibility is, the expectations, the culture, which is the environment that we create, that creates that hunger more. When I want people that want my time, want my coaching, and want to take more responsibility by saying, delegate to me and show me that they can take it, because on day one, I talk to them about self-accountability. And sometimes when I tell them, well, you know what, why you weren't considered is because I haven't seen any self-accountability in yourself. What have you done to show me these things? Yeah, and what have you done to correct it? So everything is about environment. I even tell them on day one, I manage by rewards or consequences. I would love to manage by rewards all day long, but there will be consequences. However, let me ask you this, and let's say, Christian, if I've helped people build success within our organization many times over. If I see something that you're doing that I think is detrimental to your success, would you want me to point that out to you? And on day one, everyone says yes. Of course. But then sometimes I've had to remind them on that when I have to go and correct them. Well, it's only because I owe it to you, because you asked me to bring this to you if I thought it was hindering your success. Right. So you eliminate so many things when you set the right expectations, create the environment, but your consistency is really what will drive it.
Wow, that's brilliant. And I love what you said there. Just and one of the biggest things I always tell people is like, obviously, Mark, correct me if I'm wrong, but that's not going to be an overnight thing, right? Delegating responsibility, training that individual. It's going to be 3, 6, 9, 12 months, whatever it may be.
Sure.
But obviously, the long-term goal is that leadership. A few things: responsibility, finding virtual assistants, finding executive assistants, finding individuals that can obviously do things for you, so you don't have to constantly be doing it in and out. And when you're dealing with your employees, and you say, hey, this kind of person, this is who I need to hang out with. And if you want to be that person, fantastic, right? Setting that right expectation. I love what you said. I never thought of that. And then what happens is the right A players will say, okay, if you need me to be accountable, staying in late, doing this, doing that, wonderful. Now I am, and now I'm qualified. And then guess what? The right people will rise to the occasion. And I just thought that was really brilliant. Because then what happens is you have a system that automates it because the right players will rise to the top. That's really, really awesome. And so let's dial in a little bit further in delegation as well. Okay. Because obviously that's a little technical, but I think it's really important for my audience, because one of the biggest things is I do know that they're in that point where, okay, I've got systems in place, I've got sales, I've got stuff, but how do I alleviate myself from that? So when you're talking to a leader and they've got, they're not in their scope of genius, right? They're not a visionary. They're not focusing on the bigger things. How do you help them to alleviate themselves from that so that they can take their time and focus, all their time, 100% of the time, on the top 4% of activity?
Well, some of the things that we're going to speak of may be so basic, but they actually do work. Okay. So, we all seen the 4 quadrants, right, of time management. What is important and urgent, all the way to number 4 to what's not important and urgent. And unfortunately, a lot of people spend more time in quadrant 3, which are more task oriented things, and less time in quadrant 2, which is it's not urgent, but it's important. So one of the things that I implemented is a simple to-do list that, whether it's electronic or in paper, but I'm like, let's start tracking what you're doing each day and then roll it over. But at the end of the day, I have the 4 quadrants at the end of the to list. In other words, because everything's about mindset to me. So what are the things that you truly worked on? Because sometimes we think, man, I made myself busy today, I feel great. And I want to start testing their mindset, because once again, that only brings up coaching opportunities for me. But I'm like, well, did you work on 1s or did you work on 3s? And why did you not work on 2s? So it's so many things that I implement. That's one item. And it's the 2s that brainstorming is a number 2. It's not urgent, but it's so important. Strategic planning, so number 2. It's not urgent, but it's so important. And that's what really helps to move the company, around, or the organization. But one of the other items is how are you planning Friday for next week? And it's a simple thing. And in fact, look, it comes from the book, The Rockefeller Habits by Vern Harnish. So I didn't have to reinvent the wheel. There's great tools out there. But I speak to what was successful for me, and I teach it as well to others to say, here's a great resource. But it's, what are the top 5 things you need to do next week? But when you start talking about your top 5 on that document, it's to move the business forward, to work on the business, not in the business. Don't tell me that you need to do a purchase order. That's working in the business. But what are the top 5 things you need to do next week on working on the business? And first thing I emphasize is you don't have to have 5. If it's 2, if it's 3, but they're very impactful, have those. And we share that, and we used to share it at 4:00 every day with my leadership team, that everyone would hear everyone's top 5. And we did that for several reasons. One, it builds self-accountability, but also peer-to-peer accountability. I wanted that first team environment that other peers would hear what you're working on, and sometimes even challenge you of, Christian, you've had that on your list 4 weeks in a row. Is there, and one, I would obviously coaching opportunities. What is it that you're struggling with there? You also would, so it also builds collaboration, which is important. So as leaders, you want your first team environment, which is to not be afraid to be transparent, because when you are, it opens up collaboration. Hey, you know what? I'm working on something similar, or I had an idea that's close to that. What can we do there? When you get 2 people that are innovating together, what a bonus, right? And so it's always just teaching that mindset, but to testing it. In other words, I can tell you, here's the mindset, but I had those tools that would help me to test it. Let me see your to-do list. Let me see how you're working it. Let me coach you through it. But on the top 5, I would see that, every week. And we would, post it on a SharePoint site that everyone had access to them. So it wasn't anything that was hidden. We even color code it, red, yellow, green. Green is done. Red means you hadn't started it. And yellow means you're in the process. But we really start challenging each other. There's a book called 5 Dysfunctions of a Team, great book. And it teaches about when a team has dysfunction, but a functional team really starts with trust, because after that, then they realize that conflict is actually good, not bad. It's okay to disagree. It's okay to have different opinions, because after that, then it starts to build collaboration, and it builds all the way up to results at the top of the pyramid. And so we would work that environment, because we would teach that if you disagree, how to do it. It has to be professional. You don't go grumbling behind someone's back. And if you do, that other person needs to say, stop. And if you have a problem with Kristen, you need to have a first team conversation. So we even adopt that into our vocabulary. So if I came to you, Kristen, and said, hey, Kristen, I need to have a first team conversation, you would know that I'm bringing something to you that I may be a little uncomfortable, but we both agreed to the first team rules that we're going to do that for the better of the organization. And it just builds that environment of self-accountability and peer-to-peer accountability. And when you're able to disagree but work through conflict as an agreement, your plans become so much more strategic and fleshed out better.
That's awesome. And I mean, there's just so many so many, like obviously even with, like you were saying, just the way you structure it on, hey, giving some good feedback, right? Instead of just going out there and say, well, you're so stupid. I always thought you were stupid. We shouldn't even hired you, right? It's saying, hey, you know what? I like your approach. I like you're comfortable enough to be able to share your approach. But I think maybe this is the reason why you're inaccurate, right? Or whatever it may be. And I think that's just really, really awesome. Even just like you said, with the approaches of, you listen to something that's already produced, right? Results like, Rockefeller habits, and scaling up and things like that he's actually mentioned as well. And then you're just, accountability coach to be able to implement that system on a consistent basis, because that's really what it comes down to. And like I said, Mark, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's never going to just happen overnight, but it's those small little intricacies, right? And focusing on one thing, one task. Okay, how do I delegate this task? This 1 week, I'm going to focus on training, delegating that task. Wonderful. I'm going to focus on my visionary. And then at some point, then you come over here and do other things. And so, and I love to talk about this because, obviously you've been very successful. You've written a lot of books, and I love to do a little bit of change here. And I'd really like to talk about your most recent book, and
Okay.
the reason why you did, why you wrote that, what's your heart behind it, as well as what's that vision look like for you, Mark?
Well, I mean, my most recent book is called A Script for Aspiring Women Leaders, 5 Keys to Success. So, and I've mentored aspiring women leaders for over 25 years. So, and one of the stories I tell, there's many things that got me really passionate about women in leadership, but I tell the story about when I was at Turnaround Specialist, that there was an organization. It was an owner of one location of a bit larger franchise organization that was $500,000 in debt, about ready to close the doors, but went there, quickly assessed the leadership team, all the things that I talked about. But ironically, one of the things that helped drive the success of that organization is I hired a single mother who came in and had that I cannot fail attitude. And, what can I take home to read? And, what else do I need to learn? And was really hungry for coaching. And then she referred another friend who happened to be a single mother. Before I knew it, I had 9 of them. And single mothers, and many of them grew into leadership. They had that tenacity. And the other things that it helped me develop, that I had the perspective already, but it really helped me grow, is that women have both emotion and logic. Sometimes men, we as men think that women have the emotion, but because we tend to have a logic and a lack of emotion as a whole, we don't see the logic in them. Truly, they have the logic and emotion and the tenacity, perseverance, and everything else that really helps drive them and help make balanced decisions. So they're a great addition to any leadership team. That organization, within 2 years, won the most outstanding location of 260 locations worldwide of the franchise organization.
Unbelievable.
In 3 years,
Wow.
In 3 years, that owner sold that location for $12 million. So 3 years ago, he was almost out of business, and $12 million later, still a good friend today. I hope so. But then over time, there were so many instances where I would just come across several women who started in a role that may have been entry level. I can name two of them that were my personal admin. They got hired as administrative assistants, and I always made it a point to coach my administrative assistants, meet with them. We had a once a week thing that I would coach them, and I just believe in development plans for everybody, right? You got to have a development plan. I want to see your hunger for it too, as well. See, a lot of the things I do because I think they're right, but I'm testing you as well. I want to test if you're hungry. And these ones, I'm like, you have a lot of skills, have you thought about expanding yourself to leadership? And both of them was like, I thought this would be my career here. I'd be happy. We talked about it, went to their personal goals, talked about, their family life, what were their visions, what were their dreams. And I really coached them through that. Each one, one ended up becoming a leader that took over a new department in the organization and won the award. We had 300 employees at that business, and she won the Employee of the Year award, went on the trip for the year and everything. And the next year, she actually changed roles and started a whole nother department and ran that and won an award. So it's like, this person's unstoppable. And that's the person that co-wrote the book with me. So, A Script for Aspiring Women Leaders, because she would say, but over the years, I've just had the benefit, because I learned through the processes too. So over that 25 years, I took what I developed, because it goes in stages, 5 stages, because I learned that at first we had to talk about and the name of the first chapter is define what you will live by. So to me, everything starts with your values. So what are your personal values and goals? And what is your personal mission statement? Because that's your reason for existence. And why I teach that, and we dive in deep, and there's assessments in my program. But it's like this, because we truly want to define what you will live by, what every decision you make, what strategy, what direction you go, what jobs you take, what career moves you make will adhere to your values and your mission statement. And then we start defining their personal goals and their and then on chapter 2, it's define what you will live for. What are you going to go out and attack? So we do some assessments on your skills and traits, so you understand the gaps. We do some goal setting personally and professionally, so you understand, here are the things I believe I need to develop on, and that's what I'm going to live for. Now, in chapter 3, I actually slow them up a moment, because I found that they're so hungry, they want to get out there, but boom, when they face adversity, some want to just give up. And adversity usually comes close to home. It may be the spouse or a family member that says, you're taking time away from your family, or do you really think you could do it? Everyone thinks they're doing good when they're the devil's advocate, and they come out. And so I define about how to create a support network. And the great thing about women leadership groups is, there's a lot out there, and a support network can be only women. I do also teach to go check out your Chamber of Commerce's. Sometimes it could be, you need some things from a community college group. But there's a quote out there that's anonymous, that behind every successful woman are other successful women who have her back. So they truly do a good job on supporting each other. And there's a lot of great support networks out there. So in the book, it teaches how to define what ones are around you, and even in a virtual environment, they don't have to be in your city, but then how to go evaluate them, how to have that meeting to see if they do match up, that you could put them in your development plan, your action plan that maps out what skills you're going to learn, who you're going to learn them from, and at what time frames. Obviously we go through this whole SMART goal campaign. So that helps, really puts it in stone. Then chapter 4 is implementing that and overcoming obstacles. And because they're still going to have those obstacles, but they've built that support network that's going to help them overcome it. And then chapter 5 is how to get the momentum going. And like I said, in everything I build evaluation processes. So that's in that, how to reassess yourself, when to reassess yourself, how to check your personal, are you still adhering to your values or your mission statement? And, sometimes every 3 to 5 years, those things change as well. So, but how to see, are you, because in your goal setting, we went from short term, midterm, and long term, 20 years from now, where do you want to be? How are those looking? Are you making progress? Is there light at the end of the tunnel? And it's worked really well. With the book, we built a 52-page workbook that we have where whoever buys the book can download it for free. Mm-hmm. And it's a fillable PDF, so they don't have to print 52 pages, but they have the assessments and everything that, over 25 years of development built to where it is now.
Well, what I love about this, Mark, is, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it's very practical, right? It's a very practical book. It is going to come in, step-by-step guide you, but also know, like you said, chapter 3, I believe, is we know you're going to face, heartache. You're going to face those internal demons or whatever it may be, or those external demons. And so it's like, how do you face those? And you walk literally step-by-step through that. And obviously, like, having that support, I think that's just so remarkable. Now, my question, though, is, Mark, I know a lot of individuals, a lot of CEOs right now, a lot of the C-level execs, majority of them are still positioned mostly men. And my question is, Mark, what is your thought process on behind why that is? Is it still because of culture, or is it because we've just never given the women the opportunity, or is it just mainly, maybe women just don't see themselves as that, right? It's maybe just more empowering them and saying, hey, you are valuable, you are worthy, you are capable of doing this. Or is it a combination of all? What do you think that is, if you would?
Yeah, well, I would say your last thing that you said, it is a combination of all. It's sometimes in corporate America, it takes a while to change. So it's funny because I had one that endorsed my book that says, I don't feel that I'm competing with men. I feel that we have our unique skills. And I'm like, you do. And I agree with you there. However, but let's look at the stats. Women make up 50% of corporate America, but only 20% of upper management, 10% of C-level, and 5.1% of the CEOs of S&P 1500. So data doesn't lie, and really when CEOs move on, it only shows that the pipeline is 10% women because that's who makes up the C-level. You usually don't take someone that's below a C-level and move them right to CEO, although you may, but not likely. And so there's still that gap for development. I do believe that people are starting to see and develop, organizations I've worked with and have embraced and found the women in leadership. So it's a combination of several things. I think the women, just like anybody that I teach, I'm like, you have to make it known what your desires are, so whether you're male, female, I even speak about that in my millennial book as well, how to define what your desires are and how to make yourself recognized as well. So there's a process to that. I even teach about when you're being interviewed, go in knowing the company's mission statement, what their values are and what their strategic initiatives are, and ask how you think you could be a match to that and help that grow. When I'm interviewing someone, I say, tell me, I really appreciate that your values are these things. Here's where I lived that value in the organization before. So how do you get yourself recognized? Self-accountability, when you're saying, hey, Christian, what are some of the skills that I can learn that really helps our organization with this strategic initiative? I really want to make sure that I'm on point. When I'm saying that and getting questions like that, I'm like, I want to invest in this person. They're influencing me. So remember, leadership is influence, and you can influence the leaders above you. And how do you put that into place? And so we speak about it in that a script for aspiring women leaders and in my millennial book as well. But also how to hold yourself professionally. It's funny, but just last week I was with a high-level squadron in the Air Force that, and it was all males in the group, but they're a bigger, they're an advisory, so they're very high level. And they said they only have 2 women in their whole squadron. And they also spoke to how they were like, we need more. These women are great with their responses. They don't hold it against anybody that they're the only 2. They don't say, oh, well, because I'm one of 2. No, they teach themselves as a leader themselves and that they've earned the right. But they say we can see that sometimes when they push back, their tenacity, perseverance, and their balance of logic and emotion helps us sometimes see some things from a different perspective, and that we've not always changed drastically what we've done, but we've adjusted to where we made it better. So it's just embracing that environment. We just need more people speaking about it as well.
Yeah, definitely. And I think what's so interesting, like you said, is I mean, we all understand that having a different perspective is extraordinarily powerful, right? Because again, that's what a mentorship. That's what obviously having diversity in your company and so forth, and even obviously having different political parties. That's the whole goal of capitalism as well as America, because we fight, but we're fighting in the same direction, if you will. But just journey's a little bit slightly different. But at the end of the day, it's like we still want to accomplish greatness, right? And but also coming into, like you were just saying, in retrospect to women and men, it's not that we're fighting against. I think a lot of times culture likes to say, oh, we're women and then men have to be disentangled or whatever, and it's not men over women. It's hey, you know what, we're interdependent. We can go out there and build something incredible. And just like, obviously, certain things that are facing our country and our world and so forth, it's like, hey, we have to have the best minds thinking about this one project, and we got to stop thinking about male or female. It's more of, hey, how do we solve this problem together? And I think that's what's so interesting about obviously what you talk about, and obviously your book as well, and really empowering women to do that. Now, my question is also, it's like, okay, how do you talk to those women that maybe they don't see themselves? Like, let's say, for example, I do know that as well, women at a very young age, they start having kids, right? And I know sometimes that may be an impediment, but how do you mentor someone, because I would imagine you have mentor someone that has as a married life or has as kids, but also has a very successful career, because I do know that some of our audience, not as many, but some of our audience, they're in that situation. And how do you balance that? Is there such thing as a balance? Or obviously, what do you suggest in those women to obviously partake in both of those very time consuming commitments, if you will?
Well, I mean, I do believe in work-life balance, and sometimes that's hard to achieve. Sometimes, depending on the moment, we all go through crises or priorities as well. That one's the priority more than the other. That type of stuff. But first of all, sometimes I've had the women that, especially early, that they have children. That they're not quite sure if they're made for leadership, and that's why we do the soul searching. And it's in the book. It tells a story, and in fact, it's a woman that has a young child. And so when we talk about values and we talk about vision, it's like, well, let's talk about some of the things you do with your child. And we go through some of the things. How do you teach your child this? How do you goal set with your child? And you start teaching, see, what we're talking about in business, you're already doing with your family and with your child. It's amazing how that light bulb goes off, because it's self-confidence of you. And from what I can tell, because in the book, but the person I'm even thinking of is, you do a great job with your child. You taught their child rewards or consequences. Guess what? That's leadership. You taught your child about goal setting and how to set them properly. You taught your child about responsibility, guess what? That's leadership. Now let's talk about how you take that into business and scale it to a larger scale. But let's take steps on how to get there. But then as you're balancing that, obviously, my wife and I, she's a retired nurse now, so she's retired. And she probably spends too much time with me, she says, I don't know. But, with that being said, it's like, you have your career, I have mine. And so we do talk about how to have those conversations in the book as well. In fact, one of the obstacles that the person has, she has to go to one of the women in the support networks, and in fact, two of them, to get what they went through and how they had to push through that. Because sometimes, just like at work, you need to have honest conversations. You need to have that at home. What are we striving to? What's important to both of us is our family, but also our careers are important. And what does that mean? And what is our vision and our goals that we're going to? Because we can talk about, hey, we want to own rental properties and, those type of things. And those are personal goals. But to realize it takes both of us to work then to get there. We can have these goals that are just pie in the sky, or we can set a plan of reality And what does that look like, and what does that take? Because it's going to take both of us to be responsible at home as well. And do we commit to that, or what does that look like? Maybe it is 60-40 sometimes, because I traveled all the time. So sometimes that did adjust it. There are the nuances that come into play.
That's awesome. That's awesome. And I love what you were saying there, because I mean, obviously, like you said, it is an interdependence, right? Just even with you and your wife, it's like, hey, you know what? And one of the things I've also discovered a little bit, and I think you can kind of participate as well in this, and in this regard, it's when you're at work, you're 100% at work. You're not dealing with stuff at home. When you're at home, you're 100% at home, and that helps to me, it's not about, a quantity of time, right? Oh, I got to spend, 4 hours every single day with my kids. Right. It's more of, okay, you know what? Hey, I may spend an hour a day. That's okay. But I was 100% present, and I was 100% playing basketball with them, whatever it may be. And same thing with at work. Hey, you know what? In today's world, it's not about spending 8-10 hours a week, 8-10 hours a day at work. It's, hey, get the project done, complete it, get done with it, and then do whatever you need to do, as long as you get the stuff done, which is awesome. And so, Mark, let me ask you, I mean, obviously you've got incredible knowledge, obviously leadership and women and empowering women, and I think that's definitely needed. How can they reach out to you, Mark, reaching out to having a conversation, buying your book, just getting to know you and what you stand for? How can they reach out to you, Mark?
Well, I mean, my website is markvillareal.com. So that's usually a great starting point. You'll see, you can send me an email. My phone number's there. I even give, free 30-minute consultation if you want to consult, but also my books are on Amazon. You're welcome to follow me on LinkedIn. I know that I'm maxed out as far as connections, but you can still follow me. I do a lot of posting and blogging on there as well. But I also have a Facebook page. And for the women in leadership, the aspiring women in leadership, we also have a group called the Women in Leadership Challenge. So if you look for that and ask to join the group, you can see the additional things that we put out, but it's also women helping women as well. So we have the challenge that we give some free trainings up there as well, and provide other resources.
That's awesome. That's awesome. And guys, that the description or that link will be actually in the description below, so you can take a look at that, click on that. And I would highly recommend, just reaching out to Mark, and obviously, consuming of his content, as well as, getting access to just his brain, his knowledge, his wisdom in this. Now, Mark, explain a little bit about the challenge as well, because I think that is really, really remarkable, and actually having someone step-through-step process with that, just seeing the value in that. Love to get your response on the value of that challenge and why they should go out there and get involved with that challenge.
Well, here's why they should go out, because a lot of times it's like, yeah, I can do that, and then as you start getting it, you allow something to overwhelm you. And so there's two things. One, you have the support of my co-author Crystal and I on what we built with the challenge. You have access to first thing we give you is a download of your assessment, but then we talked about the workbook as well. But we actually take you through a overview of the 5 chapters. So we do 5 days of training. Each day is on a different chapter of the book that gives you the concept. So we really, anything that we can do to help break it down, instead of, this is a little overwhelming, because really as you start engaging, and then as you participate with others who are engaging, you start seeing I can do this. Because once again, it starts with your belief system that's going to drive your attitude, that's going to drive your behavior. And so we wanted to break something down that we understand, that we wanted to build that confidence in your belief system.
That's awesome. And Mark, one of the things I always find so interesting is that, and I think it's interesting with everybody, right? Men, women, they go through life, and specifically women as well, because we're talking about them. But it's like, oh, nobody's had to deal with the situation I'm in, right? Oh, nobody's had to go through what I had. And then what happens with these challenges a lot of times, and this, this support community, is you start realizing that other women are going through the same problem, same issue, same difficulty as you are, which then allows you to open up and say, oh, wow, then what did you do? How did you do it, right? And being able to overcome these challenges. And I think, guys, I would highly recommend reaching out to Mark, going and actually getting involved with his challenge, being around that community, because what that will do is open up doors, but it will also open up your belief system, allowing you to change it, adjust it, and say, oh, wow, that's what's been holding me back. And so, Mark, I really just appreciate what you've been able to bring to our audience. I know that's been very valuable to me, and I know that's going to be very, very valuable to our audience as well. So thanks so much. I really appreciate your time, bud.
Well, thanks for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Awesome. Thanks so much.
Hey, stop. This is Christian D. Evans, host of Journey with Christian D. Evans podcast. And I just want to say personally, thank you for listening to our podcast. And, if you love what you're hearing right now, please, like this, share this, and show some love to our guest and write a review and, share this with your friend, your family, someone that truly needs it, because at the end of the day, you can make an impact in that person's life by sharing their story with that individual. And again, if you're a new guest, welcome to our community. We're so excited. We're so just honored. And secondly, if you're a returning guest, hey, we appreciate the love. Thank you. Share this with your friend and family. And guys, remember, be uncommon if you can.